Hello, everyone. My name is Peter Weddle, and on behalf of the worldwide membership of TA Tech, I'd like to welcome you to this latest edition of Career Makers. This show is a little different from the others that you might see on the net. It goes beyond strategies and tactics and really focuses on the people who make those strategies and tactics work. Think of it as a little wisdom with some storytelling wrapped around it. Because what we want to know is how these very successful people advanced in their career, how they were able to achieve the success they've had, and how they were able to have the impact that they've had on the talent acquisition field. And today we're especially fortunate to have with us Nicky Garcea. She is the co-founder and chief customer officer at Capfinity. Nicky, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Peter, for having me.
Well, it's a real pleasure to see you. So let's begin by just introducing yourself and Capfinity. What is it that you do there, and what is the company all about?
Thanks. So as you've mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders of Capfinity, and I'm also an IO psychologist by background. I'm the chief customer officer, and I head up the US team. So I wear multiple hats. And Capfinity as a business is a strengths-based recruitment and development business supporting global brands across the TA space, all with a methodology of strength. So all of our products and solutions look not just at performance, but also what motivates and engages people to do well at work.
Sounds like important work. Can you give us just an example of a recent project? What kind of outcomes do you look for when working with your clients?
So one project that I'm really proud of that we've delivered really in the last few weeks has been a project for the UN. They were embarking on a new graduate program and wanted to hire people globally. It was led out of the US, but actually they were hiring graduates in multiple countries. And in a very short space of time, we had products that were aligned to their criteria. We had both online and offline, so they were able to run virtual assessment centers. And these products gave them a narrative and an immersive experience of what life and the jobs in the UN would be like. And most importantly, there was no adverse impact. So we were able to look for graduates across 140 countries, different genders, different ethnicities, and then allow them to pick their final group, which they were able to for hopefully what will go on to be brilliant hires, but through a process that was deployed completely virtually, but has allowed them to put a new program in place that will hopefully give them a great talent pipeline in markets where they're emerging and doing some of their best work. So that would be an example of a project we've delivered recently, and I'm just proud particularly of the brand and the work they do.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like something that could translate well into commercial organizations with increasingly global workforces as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of our brands are of that type of organization. So we do a lot of work within the global space with large brands. And the UN is just one example of that. But yeah, we're deploying that type of thing pretty much every day of the week at Capfinity.
Great. So let's talk a little bit more about you. So where are you from? Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? What'd you like doing as a kid?
Well, we should probably guess on the basis of my accent of where I'm from.
Well, I was going to leave that to you.
So I grew up. I grew up in the south of England, and for anyone who can't picture that, if you know a character Winnie the Pooh, I grew up very close to the 100-acre wood. It does exist. It's a place called Ashdown Forest. You can go and play poo sticks should you ever wish to, but that's where I grew up. And I left there at 18, went to university in different colleges across the UK. So I'm from the UK, I'm still in the UK, but as of November, when I'm allowed to fly again, I will be back in the US. So a trip I'm looking forward to. Yeah. But you want to know a little bit about my childhood, don't you? And yeah, kind of what's made me, I guess, kind of be the person that I am. So I don't think I could tell you what I enjoyed doing. That's a great question. I can't go that far back. But what I will tell you is that I unfortunately lost my father when I was 6 years old.
Mm.
So he died of melanoma. He was 43, and I share that story with people because, particularly as a working woman, what it led me to see as a child was a really amazing mother who worked incredibly hard, who was also very available for my brother and I. And it gave me a perspective on a couple of things. And one of those was that life's very short and very precious, which probably made me want to squeeze lots into what I was doing. And I still think about that today. And it also made me realize that work wasn't just something that paid people, but in the case of my mum, it allowed her to provide for her family. It gave her a routine. It made her actually go on to have a very successful career once she was widowed. And as I look back now, those are things that I think shaped lots of the things I went on to do, and is probably why I went on to study psychology. And one of the things that I did love to do as a teenager, and it's very geeky, and I hope people will still come and approach me when we can meet face to face, is I was obsessed with careers and career services. So I would hang out and read all the different things that there were, all the different careers that were possible as a young adult. And I know it sounds incredibly boring, but these are things that I think essentially led me to be fascinated by work psychology and ultimately go on to start a business that is helping people have jobs that play to their strengths.
Nicky, I can honestly say that we've done dozens of these interviews, and that's the very first time I've ever heard someone say that they love looking at careers as a teenager.
I know,
and
it's
young
really
adult.
sad. My stepfather will vouch for, I used to go home and show him these jobs and we would talk about them. And I guess, Peter, and it speaks a lot to talent acquisition, the reason why I find it fascinating that I was a bit obsessed with careers, but there are so many jobs in this space and at this time that people do not know exist. And I feel, and I hope others do, I feel compelled to help people find those jobs and, break down what is it about being a project manager or an IO psychologist that people could actually do it. They just don't know that it exists. They don't realize they've got transferable skills that would let them do that job. So I think that's what I was fascinated by back then. And it's probably what still fascinates me about the TA space and IO psychology.
So, well, first, when you were growing up, was there a career? I know you got into IO psychology, but was there a career that sort of piqued your interest that you didn't follow, that you were curious about, but wasn't the one that actually got selected?
Yeah, so I was as geeky as I was about career services, I was also very persistent about getting myself work experience. So I would go and try and get work experience anywhere I could. So I had a part-time job in retail, which put me through university, and I still have a massive passion for retail. But I went and tried out being a journalist for a little bit of work experience, and I'm not great at spelling and grammar. My Catfinity colleagues listening in will vouch for that, so that didn't work out so well. I also probably gave my mother a heart attack when I said I wanted to try soliciting, and she quickly corrected me and said I wanted to try being a solicitor. So I got work experience in that. And again, it was probably the heavy writing element of that put me off. So what I then found was a teacher said to me, well, I think actually you might like human resources. And rather than go down just business route, I thought I would try out psychology first. So I did a psychology degree before then going on to do a master's in work psychology.
So that's how you ended up in talent acquisition. And did you at any point think that you might wanted to get into recruiting yourself, or were you always focused on the IO psychology side?
So I actually, one of my first jobs was actually building assessments. So I would build assessments at a place called the National Foundation of Educational Research, and we would build assessments for schools and work. And what I realized really quickly is I wanted to be with people and not just doing the technical side of things. And that led me into a consulting job. And the consulting on talent acquisition, as opposed to being an in-house recruiter, I fell in love with. And it's not a job for everybody. It's sometimes it's long hours. There's a lot of you can manage many things at once. It's very fast paced. But if you like variety and you think it's a privilege to be allowed into a number of organizations, which essentially, I still am in the role I do at Capfinity, then I think it's a contagious job. And I say it's a privilege to be able to see so many organizations. But because I've loved it so much, I think I've probably ruled myself out of being an in-house recruiter. I probably am now at an age where I'm going to have to stick with always supporting in-house recruiters and talent acquisition specialists. But it was the consulting side that I got the bug, and I've stayed on that side as opposed to working in-house.
You mentioned earlier that one of the things that pointed you in the direction of your current field is the knowledge you have that there are so many occupations out there that people just simply don't know about. Now, when you're working for an organization like a client, they're focused on filling those open recs. They're focused on helping make that organization successful. Is there a way for employers to be helpful in educating the workforce about the available opportunities in career fields? I mean, obviously they can put job postings out there, but is there something more that you think we could be doing?
I think there's so much more that we could be doing, and I would start always, particularly at these times, with the job description, which I think fundamentally often becomes a barrier to people thinking they could do that job. And the more job descriptions I review, the more that they can often, yes, they're very job relevant. And in the US, they absolutely have to be job relevant, but they often list skills and attributes that are sometimes aligned to the preference of the manager. They are sometimes very one-dimensional. So they might go down a cognitive route. They might be very skills-based, but they don't broaden out and talk about the team working or the collaboration or the innovation within the job. And I think as a result, both for external people looking in, but also then for lateral movers within organizations, sometimes people who could do that job brilliantly discount themselves from putting their hat in the ring and trying out. So one of the things I think that we need to be able to try to do better is communicate the things that make up the job that are slightly more accessible to everybody, and that we don't lead so heavily on maybe past experience or a technicality that possibly can be trained. Obviously, there are some jobs where that's not the case, but there are so many jobs that if we broke them down into simpler parts, I think more people would feel like they could go on to apply for them, and probably would understand that they had skills that could be aligned to that job. And I think about it a lot. We do some voluntary work with 4Block, the veterans organization. I remember hearing the founder, Mike Abraham, talk about his experience and why 4Block came into existence. And there's a great example of people with incredible resumes and they can't quite match the skill to the job description. I think if we can try to get over this hurdle, that will really help free up the talent that could apply, but also is inside organizations.
Yeah, I think that's a real challenge. I'm an old partner in the Hay Group, which had a methodology for describing jobs. And it's been my experience that a lot of organizations which used a Hay or a similar methodology to organize jobs within a structure for comp and benefits purposes, which is really what Hay was all about. But they use the same job description to go out and try to recruit people. And in part, that's driven by the fact that in many cases, recruiters, aren't expert in the jobs for which they are recruiting. So they have to rely on what's available to them institutionally, the job description and or the hiring manager. And also because recruiters, at least here in the States, they're averaging 10, 15, 20 recs a piece. So they don't have the time to really be as thoughtful about creating a job description as they might otherwise be. Any thoughts on how we deal with that challenge? Because I think you're absolutely right. We need to give people more of an opportunity to, connect with a job where they might, at least on the surface, not be the perfect candidate, but inside have all the intangibles that would make them a wonderful performer.
I think from what we do at Capfinity is we try to break those jobs down to a simpler language, often calling out the strengths, often trying to make sure that they don't read onto just a certain set of strengths or types of skills. I see a lot of job descriptions that basically speak to drive, cognitive ability, technical capability, and that will find you a certain type of person. So I think being mindful of, is this job description actually kind of not so much bias, but is it only going to let certain people think that role is attractive, but simplifying the job description and breaking it down into its simplest parts and really trying to hone in on, and I think Hayes actually over the years have done a great job on this, but the behaviors, the strengths that make up that job, and not always putting them in that work setting, just describing the behavior as it needs to be demonstrated so people can think, actually, I might have a transferable skill here. I have used my collaboration or I have used my project management in another world, and it could be applicable in this scenario. And I think that's got to be the key. It's got to be in a language that anyone could read it, understand it, and feel like they could apply for it.
Great. So you had this fascination with careers, and
you're not going to get over that, are you, Peter?
No, I'm absolutely astonished by that. And then you had a professor, an educator, suggest that maybe the human resources field was right for you. So you got into this crazy world of talent acquisition. We all in our careers from time to time hit a bump in the road, face a challenge that we hadn't expected. And we learned something from that, even though we might be a bit bruised and skin our knees, it's still a learning opportunity. Did you have a challenge in your career that you think was particularly formative for you, that you really learned something important about?
I think I was thinking about challenges before this, and I actually think that there's been no one single challenge I would call out. Clearly, when you have kids and you're running a business, those things are things you navigate, but I wouldn't necessarily, homeschooling in the pandemic, all things that many of us have worked through. I think the thing, particularly in my role at Capfinity and as the Chief Customer Officer, I am often the port of call when something doesn't go right. And so I might be the last person that someone will speak to say, actually, I want this changed, or I want things to be better. And one of the things that I have discovered my kind of natural tendency to resolution, but it gives me a lot of comfort, is that the facts are always friendly, the data is always kind. And so one of the things that I find when I do hit challenges, and work is not perfect, as a vendor, we are not perfect, I will always go back to and take my teams back to, what are you struggling with? What has come up? Is there anything in the data that will help give us the answers? What are the facts in this situation? And I have to say, every time we just kind of down tools and go to the factual information, and then from there build up a resolution. It might be a different solution, it might be a different angle. that nearly always, I actually can't think of a time where that hasn't either resolved an issue or can often be presenting client work back to them, has found a way that actually that's going to land better than what we were doing before. So I think actually, we face lots of challenges, and particularly in the role I'm in, I'm navigating challenges all the time. But this approach to those challenges, particularly customer challenges, I'm finding that just going back to the data is key every time.
So then let's talk about the flip side. Can you tell us a story about a project that you're particularly proud of, something that you think not only served the client well, but perhaps taught you something about your own interests, capabilities, strengths, and so forth?
That's a great question. And my mind goes to all the things that have happened like in the last few weeks.
I
so
imagine.
let me track back a little further. I think probably our work at EY over the years is something that I'm very proud of. So EY were one of the first clients that we had at Capfinity, and they were prepared to introduce strengths-based recruitment into their graduate selection process. So this is going back about 10 years. They've stayed with us as a client. And what I'm proud of is that we, over the years, have been able to often experiment with EY, work in partnership with them, but also they were the first organisation in the UK that wouldn't focus just on the academics when they were hiring graduates. So they would focus in on the behaviours and the things that we had seen over the years were predictors of talent in the business. And that created a big uprising of other organisations across the UK and now, and I'm not claiming that this was individually just Capfinity, but we have clients, Accenture, who've now this year taken a similar thing to the removal of GPA in graduate hiring. But it made a lot of organisations question whether past experience, the things they were putting on their application forms, their academic thresholds, whether those were truly the best route to hiring graduate talent. And what it's also allowed is to show that using assessment, particularly online assessment that's sometimes thought of as quite a brutal tool, that by putting assessment together that can be really immersive, can take the job to the candidate, but still allow an assessment of their behaviours and their skills, can mean that you can actually put in front of partners at somewhere like EY, but this approach has been taken now to banks and insurance firms, that you can put through candidates that are going to be able to do the job, but who maybe never would have got through your application form with the other criteria and barriers that you had before moving to this different approach. And that has the thing that makes me most proud is when I'm out at events, and I can remember being in Singapore and a client, Standard Chartered Bank, pointed over to a group of graduates and they said, if it wasn't for strengths, we wouldn't have hired any of those people sat over there. And then I was at a breakfast event and a client, Aviva, said, our final group, we hired a woman, she'd never been to university, she was a carer, our highest performing individual, but we would never have looked at her on her resume alone. And it's those approaches that then lead to the stories of actual individuals who might not have been seen by those organizations getting into work. And those are things I'm really proud of. And my hope going forward, and we can see the data coming out of the pandemic, is that people are maybe, starting to realize that assessment isn't something that we need to be scared of. Online assessment, actually used in the right way, can give some brilliant complementary evidence to people. And obviously it's very easy to deploy at these times. So yeah, those projects that started off at EY but led to a bit of a movement, those are probably the things I'm most proud of.
That's a great story. when you work with an organization as you have with EY for that long a period of time, it's not unusual to see your point of contact, sort of your chief customer, if you will, change. And that in itself presents a challenge. You've got to figure out how to deal with a whole new person. Any lessons learned or thoughts about how you deal with changing customers at an organization?
Yeah, it's a brilliant question. And as Capfinity has been around 16 years and some of our clients have been with us for 16 years, I sometimes feel like perhaps I am the in-house TA person because I've been there so long. That happens quite a lot. I think the first thing is to be able to always, I guess, share the story of the past and be able to be that point of reference and data, because often a new person will want to evoke new ideas. They might want to look back at what's happened in the past. They'll always want to make their mark. And so there's an aspect of definitely kind of inquiry as the new person comes in. So I think we'll always have to prepare ourselves for that. And then there's also a piece of to never assume that they might want to continue working with you. So I never make that assumption, and I'm always ready for someone to want to part company just because you were maybe the incumbent TA leads representative. And then the next piece is really trying to understand, what does that person want to, how do they want to make their mark? What do they want to be famous for? How can we leverage the work from the past, but for them to build out their goals, their narrative, their story, and trying to be agile enough to have a solution that will grow, but will still be good for the organization, because you do have that knowledge of the business by virtue of having been there for a number of years. So it's very much around trying to be supportive, learning from the data, make no assumptions, and trying to grow with that new individual as well. But it's a great question because it happens all the time. And at these times, when TA is such a, when jobs in TA are so desired, I think we heard last week, is it harder to find someone to work in recruitment than it is in software development in the US at the moment, because of what's happening. There's a lot of movement and a lot of new clients for us.
Well, that was really insightful. I think, seeing oneself as the institutional knowledge and a resource for a new person coming into an organization, but also, to use your term, to be agile enough to recognize that he or she is going to want to make their own mark, and that may need some adaptation on our part is so important. So we've now come to my favorite part of the show, and that is recognizing that you began your career when you were just 13, and that you've gained a lot of wisdom along the way. If you knew what you know now when you were your 21-year-old self and just starting off in the world of work, what advice would you give yourself?
So my advice, with a heavy strengths lens now, would be not to let your weaknesses define you. I didn't know age 21 that you could be successful if you weren't the brightest or the most intelligent. And what I've learned over the years is that there's lots of other attributes other than just sheer intellect that make people good at their jobs. And age 21, I was definitely trying to hone all the things that were weaknesses in the quest that by polishing off those weaknesses, I would be a great employee. And through some good managers and my co-partner in crime, Alex Lindley, I've realized that, your strengths play a massive part in making you successful and happy in your career. And 21-year-old self would be to not let your career be defined by your weaknesses.
Well, that's great advice. And for all of you watching the show, I hope that you've learned a lot from our conversation with Nicky Garcea. Make sure that you stop by capfinity.com and take a look at their assessment products and services. And come back and join us again. Our next show is October the 12th with Karen Mullen, who is the president at MedReps and a longtime TA Tech member, as is Capfinity. So, Nicky, thank you very much for joining us today. It was great to have you join us from across the pond. And we'll look forward once we get this horrible pandemic behind us, we'll look forward to having you visit us here in the States shortly.
Can't wait to see you, Peter. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.